Jack lived alone at the edge of a quiet spaceport colony. His house was small, built from old steel panels and leftover parts from ships long forgotten. Each morning he woke up to silence. Each night he ate dinner alone, staring at the empty chair across the table. That chair used to belong to someone, but now it was just a memory. Jack worked as a mechanic, fixing old cargo ships and broken drones. He didn't talk much and no one talked to him. The war had changed everything. He had lost his family, his home, and his will to care. Only his hands remembered how to fix things. So he kept working. Day after day in silence. The food he ate was always the same. Cold rations from metal packs, dry bread, and flavorless soup. Sometimes he heated it, sometimes not. It didn't matter. There was no one to impress, no one to feed, no one to share it with. But everything changed one rainy night. It was late, and Jack was returning from his workshop. His boots were heavy with mud, his coat dripping wet. As he reached his front door, he heard something strange. A soft rustle near the trash bins behind the house. He stopped and listened. At first he thought it was a stray animal. But then he saw her, a figure crouched low in the shadows, shivering and covered in a dirty cloak. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, large and full of fear. She wasn't human, that was clear. Blue skin, delicate fingers, and strange markings on her face. She looked weak, tired, and cold. Jack didn't move. Neither did she. Finally, he said, "You're not safe out here." She didn't answer. He took a step closer. "I won't hurt you," he said slowly. Still, no reply. But she didn't run, either. He pulled off his coat and handed it to her. She stared at it, then at him, then slowly reached out and took it. Jack left a pack of food near her and went inside. He didn't expect her to stay. The next morning, the smell of food woke him. Real food, not from a ration pack. Something warm, something that reminded him of Earth. He walked to the kitchen and froze. She was there inside his home, wearing his coat, standing at the stove, cooking. How did she get in? He didn't lock the door last night. She turned when she heard him, but didn't speak, just pointed to the table where a plate was waiting. Steam rose from it, filling the room with the smell of herbs, spices, and something he hadn't felt in years, comfort. Jack sat down without a word. He took a bite. His eyes widened. It was delicious, better than anything he remembered. He looked up at her, confused. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked. She just tilted her head, saying nothing. She didn't eat. She just watched him like she was studying every bite. When he finished, she cleaned the plate and left the kitchen. No words, no sound, just silence. Jack found her sleeping, in the corner of his living room later, curled up like a child. He placed a pillow under her head and covered her with a blanket. He didn't know who she was, or what she had gone through, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her go back. Out there. That night, Jack sat at the table again. This time, the chair across from him wasn't empty. The alien woman sat quietly, her eyes watching the soup she had made. He ate slowly, feeling warmth in every bite. He didn't know her name, but he didn't need to. Her cooking spoke louder than any words. From that day on, she stayed. Every meal she cooked. Every evening they sat together, still no words, but something had changed. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of meaning, of shared space, of quiet understanding. And for the first time in years, Jack stopped counting the days he had been alone. Each morning, the smell of fresh food filled Jack's home. And each time, he was surprised, not just by the food, but by the woman who made it. Silently, carefully, and with a kind of grace he couldn't explain. She still hadn't spoken. Not even a single word, but her hands moved with purpose. Her eyes stayed calm, and her meals, every one of them, felt like something out of a memory he didn't know he had. The alien woman's skin was pale blue, with soft patterns that glowed faintly at night. Her long silver hair hung down her back, and she wore the same cloak every day, stitched and patched in places. She moved quietly, almost like a ghost, but her food brought life into the house again. One afternoon, Jack returned from his workshop covered in grease. He found a plate already waiting on the table. It looked simple, just a bowl of stew and bread, but the smell stopped him in his tracks. He sat down and took a bite. His eyes watered, not from the heat but from the taste. It was his mother's stew. "How did you?" he whispered, staring at the bowl. He looked toward the kitchen, but she was already gone. Only the sound of water running in the sink remained. Later that night, Jack sat on the porch thinking. He hadn't told anyone about that stew in years. He barely remembered the recipe himself, but she had recreated it perfectly. He got up and went inside. She was sitting on the floor near the heater, staring at a small book, his old recipe book. It had been damaged during the fire long ago. Most pages torn or burned, but some had survived, and she had found them. "You read this?" he asked. She looked up at him and nodded once, slowly, then turned the book so he could see. She had redrawn the missing parts using symbols and pictures. Jack sat beside her, flipping through the pages. She had decoded everything, adding notes, drawings, and even ingredients from her own culture. It wasn't just cooking, it was like a language. Jack pointed to her chest, then asked gently, "What's your name?" She tapped her wrist, showing him a faded metal band. He leaned in and activated the chip inside. A small holographic name appeared. Valari, Valari. It sounded soft, like her presence. Jack repeated it out loud, and for the first time, she smiled over. The next few days, Jack noticed more changes. The air in the house smelled better, warmer. The table was always clean, and the food was never the same twice. She made dishes that reminded him of Earth, and sometimes meals he had never seen before, using strange fruits, glowing spices, and meats that melted in the mouth. But something bothered him. One evening, while she was asleep, he noticed her wrist again. The metal band wasn't just an ID chip. It was part of a slave collar. He had seen those during the war, worn by captured alien workers, forced to serve. Without rights, his chest grew tight. She hadn't just been a traveler, she had escaped something. The next morning, he tried to talk to her. "Valari," he said gently, "were you owned?" She didn't look up, but her hands froze. Then slowly she nodded once. Jack clenched his fists under the table. Whoever had owned her had taken her voice, her freedom, her past, but not her hands, not her heart. She had escaped, and instead of running far away, she stayed here, cooking for a stranger. That evening, he decided to thank her properly. He went to the market in the colony and bought real vegetables, clean oils, and a piece of fresh meat, something rare and expensive. When he returned home, she looked surprised. To see the basket of ingredients, he motioned for her to sit, then pointed to himself. "I'll cook today," he said with a smile. Her eyes widened, but she didn't stop him. He tried his best, burning a few things and dropping the salt twice. She laughed, not loudly but softly, like wind through glass. It was the first sound of joy he had heard from her. And when they sat together and ate his messy food, she took his hand gently and squeezed it once. That night, Jack didn't sleep much. He thought about how her silence said so much. She didn't need words to teach, to care, to heal. She spoke with flavor, with warmth, with memory, and in every meal she gave him something he thought he had lost forever: home. For weeks, life felt calm again. Jack worked during the day and Valari cooked quietly in the kitchen. Every night they shared meals together, meals filled with warmth, silence, and comfort. Jack had never spoken so little, yet felt so deeply, understood. But peace doesn't last forever, especially in places watched by drones. One morning, as Jack stepped out to check his power lines, he noticed a strange humming sound in the sky. 3 silver drones floated above his home, scanning slowly. They weren't from the local colony. They had no markings, just smooth, unblinking machines built for one purpose. Searching, Jack's chest tightened. He walked back inside and found Valari cleaning the stove. Her back was turned, but she had stopped moving. She had heard the sound too. "They're not from here," Jack said softly. Valari didn't respond, but her hands gripped the counter edge. Jack closed the blinds and pulled out an old storage crate. It was dusty and heavy, filled with things from the past. Tools, wires, an old blaster, but most important, a floor panel key. He went to the back of the house, opened a hidden door in the floor, and revealed a small cellar. Cold, dark, and safe. "Hide here," he said. Valari looked at the hole, then at him. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded and climbed down. The drone scanned the house for 2 more hours. Then they vanished, without knocking, without asking. But Jack knew better. This wasn't over. That night he made dinner himself. Basic stew, barely seasoned. He carried it down into the cellar where Valari waited. She looked at the bowl, then at him, her eyes questioning. He smiled and said, "Sorry, I'm not as good as you." She chuckled softly, then tasted the food. And for the first time she spoke just one word. "Warm." Jack froze, the spoon halfway to his mouth. He looked at her, unsure if he imagined it. But Valari smiled again, this time wider, and nodded. She had spoken in that small cellar surrounded by old crates and cold stone walls. Jack felt something shift. It was like a new light had turned on inside her. She wasn't just surviving. Anymore, she was trying to live. The next day, Jack checked the drone logs in town. No official report, no records. Whoever sent them had power, quiet power, and Valari was the target. Back at home, she was in the kitchen again. But this time, the smell in the air was different. It wasn't just food, it was something more. A spice he had never smelled before, rich and deep. He stepped into the kitchen and paused. Valari had cooked a dish he didn't recognize. Small rolls filled with glowing fruit, steamed and served on polished leaves. He took a bite, and his heart skipped. It tasted like nothing on earth, yet reminded him of his dreams, sweet, soft, and powerful. "What is this?" he asked, surprised. Valari walked over, picked up the recipe book, and pointed to a new page she had added, drawn in careful lines, written in her native script, with symbols for flavor and emotion. She had created something new, something hers. Jack stared at the page, then back at the food. He understood now. Cooking wasn't just survival for her. It was how she spoke, how she remembered, how she resisted. That night, he asked, "Why are they after you?" Valari looked down, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. Then she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the scar from the slave collar. She pointed to it, then to her throat. Jack understood. They had taken her voice, forced her to cook in silence. For powerful people, for monsters in uniform. But she had escaped and they wanted her back. "Not happening," Jack said firmly. "This is your home now." Valari didn't speak, but she reached out and took his hand in both of hers. Her touch was gentle but firm. He felt the strength in her fingers, the strength of someone who had suffered and still chose to heal. Later that night, Jack couldn't sleep. He walked into the kitchen and looked at the table. It was filled with ingredients, some from Earth, some not. He realized something then. Her cooking was not just for them. It was a message, a silent shout that said, "I am still here. I remember. I will never be theirs again." And Jack decided something. If they came again, they wouldn't find a frightened woman, they'd find a family, a defender, a reason for her to never cook in fear again. The sun had not yet risen, but Jack was already awake. His tools sat untouched on the bench, his coffee cold in his hands. Valari stood at the stove, cooking as always, but her body was tense, her movement stiff. Something was wrong. Jack noticed the air felt heavier today. The silence between them wasn't peaceful like before. It was filled with worry. Even Valari's food smelled different. Still delicious, but sharp. Hurried. Jack walked outside to check the perimeter. He followed the edge of the fence just like he always did. That's when he saw it. A small device, barely visible in the dirt, blinking red. A tracking beacon. He picked it up slowly, heart pounding. This wasn't from a local authority. It was from a private hunter. Someone who wanted to find her without questions or law. Jack ran inside, holding the device. Valari saw it and dropped the ladle she was holding. Her eyes widened in fear. Her breathing quickened. She reached for the table to steady herself. Jack spoke calmly. "They're coming." She looked at him, lips parted, but no sound came. Just trembling silence. He guided her to the hidden cellar, again. But this time she refused. She shook her head and stepped back. Then she whispered, "No." Jack stopped, shocked. It was the second word he had heard from her. Her voice was quiet, but clear, strong, even through fear. "They'll take you," he warned. She shook her head again, then she pointed to herself, to the kitchen, and then to him. Her hands moved with urgency, forming shapes. He didn't understand all of it, but the meaning was clear. She wasn't going to run this time. Suddenly the house shook. A ship landed just beyond the fence, silent and black. A sleek craft made for hunting, not for diplomacy. Jack grabbed his old blaster, rusted but loaded. Valari reached for nothing, but walked to the stove and picked up a small pouch of spices. She tucked it into her cloak and followed Jack to the door. Outside, the air was still. Dust rose around the ship as its ramp lowered. 3 figures walked down, tall, armored, faceless. They didn't knock, they didn't speak, they simply scanned the house. One of them pointed a weapon at Jack. "Step aside, human," it said, voice like static. "She belongs to us." Jack stood his ground. "She belongs to no one," he said, voice steady. The hunter stepped closer. "You will be spared if you cooperate." Jack aimed his blaster. "I've eaten better food in the last month than I have in 5 years. You're not taking the reason why." Behind him, Valari stepped forward. She raised her hand slowly, then from her pouch, she tossed a pinch of blue powder into the air. The scent hit the hunters like a wave. They staggered, coughing, their visors clouded. One dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. Jack didn't understand. It wasn't poison. It was something deeper. A rare spice from her world, used in sacred meals. A spice that triggered memory, pain, and emotion. It brought guilt, and guilt weakened them. One hunter removed his helmet, tears running down his face. "I remember her food," he said, voice cracking. "She cooked for the generals." She never said a word. The second fell beside him, hands shaking. Only the third remained, weapon raised. Jack fired, hitting the gun from the hunter's hand. Then he stepped forward, blaster still aimed. "You can leave, or you can stay here." Buried. The hunter looked at Valari, then at his companions, broken, shamed, without another word. He retreated to the ship. It lifted off and vanished into the sky. Silence returned, but it was different now, not fearful, not tense. It was a silence of victory. Jack turned to Valari. She looked up at him, eyes soft, and whispered a new word, "Free." He lowered the blaster and smiled. "Yes, you are." Back inside, they cleaned up the mess. Valari returned to the kitchen. This time she cooked slowly, with ease. The scent was calm, sweet, familiar. At the table, Jack took the first bite and paused. It was his favorite dish, the one his wife used to make. Before the war, he looked up, but Valari didn't look at him. She simply sipped tea quietly. No more hiding, no more cellars. She was not a ghost anymore. She was part of the home, and her voice, though still soft, was no longer gone. They couldn't stay in the house anymore. Not after the hunters came. Jack knew they would return with better masks, stronger orders, and no guilt left to stop them. Valari didn't argue. She simply packed a satchel with spices, dried fruits, and a small wooden spoon. Then she looked at Jack and nodded. They left before sunrise, walking through the back roads, hidden by hills and dry trees. Jack had an old friend, Revo, an ex-smuggler who now ran a repair garage on an underground station near the edge of neutral space. If anyone could give them shelter, even for a short while, it was Revo. The journey took 3 days. They crossed dry fields, broken towns, and sleeping checkpoints. Valari walked without complaint. Even when her feet blistered, even when the nights were cold, she stayed close to Jack, quiet but present. When they finally reached the station, it was dusk. The air was filled with smoke and grease. Lights flickered weakly above metal alleys. The garage was behind a bar, hidden under layers of fake doors and rusted panels. Jack knocked 3 times, then paused, then knocked once more. The door opened and Revo stood there, big, bald, and grumpy as ever. "Jack, you look like a man running from ghosts." Jack smiled weakly. "Close enough." Revo let them in, but not without a suspicious glance at Valari. "Who's she?" Jack answered softly. "A friend." Revo raised an eyebrow. "Quiet friend." They sat inside, warming their hands by a small fire. Jack explained everything, from the first night he found her, to the hunters, to the strange spice that made grown soldiers cry. Revo didn't believe half of it. "I don't hide fugitives, Jack," he said. "This place is barely mine as it is." Jack nodded, knowing it was too much to ask. Valari stood and walked to the corner, where a small kitchen sat unused. She opened a cabinet, pulled out an old pan, and lit the stove. Revo frowned. "What's she doing?" Jack didn't answer. Valari moved without speaking, her fingers grabbing whatever she could find. Onions, dried roots, a forgotten jar of oil, and some strange mushrooms growing from a crack in the wall. She added her own spices, gently pouring them like magic dust. The scent changed the room in seconds. Revo's grumbling stopped. He leaned forward, sniffing the air. "What in the stars is that smell?" Valari served 3 small bowls, placed them on the metal table, and stepped back. Jack tasted his first, warm, soft, rich, a blend of comfort and strength. Revo followed. 1 bite, just one, and his eyes filled with tears. "This," he whispered. "This tastes like home." He looked at her, stunned. "This is what my mother used to make on cold nights. But she died 30 years ago." Valari said nothing. She only bowed her head. Revo wiped his face and stood. He opened a small panel in the wall and typed something. A door behind them slid open, revealing a safe room lined with blankets and soft light. "You can stay," he said finally, "as long as you keep cooking like that." Jack smiled. Valari did too, a quiet thank you written in her eyes. Word began to spread quickly. Mechanics from nearby stations stopped by, just to visit Revo. Miners brought scraps in exchange for a taste of the silence. Valari didn't speak to anyone. She didn't have to. Her food told stories, of loss, of memory, of hope. One miner, after eating her stew, confessed he had been planning to end his life, but the taste reminded him of his daughter's birthday. Long ago, he said he wanted to live again. Valari didn't cry, but her hands trembled as she washed the bowl. Jack watched all of this with quiet pride. Valari was no longer hiding. She was healing others 1 meal at a time, and in doing so she was healing herself. But peace was never permanent. Late one night, as Jack repaired a broken drone in the back room, he heard a whisper from Revo's communicator. "Hunters are scanning nearby stations. They're asking about a blue-skinned cook." Jack walked to the kitchen. Valari was stirring soup, but her eyes met his. She already knew. He whispered, "They're coming." She took a deep breath, then reached for her pouch of spices. But this time she didn't look afraid. She looked ready. Jack took her hand gently. "We'll move again if we have to." Valari shook her head and whispered, "Not this time." This time she would fight, not with weapons, but with warmth, memory, and the power of food that could melt even the coldest heart. The underground station buzzed with life. Broken ships groaned in the hangars. Merchants shouted over each other, and tired workers moved like shadows under flickering lights. But in one quiet corner of the lower deck, something different was happening. Something small, silent, and powerful. Valari stood behind a simple wooden table. She wore no sign, no uniform, no name tag, only a long apron stained with spices and a faint smile on her face. Steam rose from her pots and bowls, carrying a scent that made people stop walking, stop talking, and simply breathe. Her stall was not listed in the trader logs. It had no license, no permit, and no walls. But it had a line of strangers waiting with empty plates and full hearts. Jack stood nearby, watching carefully. He had built the stall using scrap metal and Revo's spare parts. Nothing fancy. just enough to hold a stove, a table, and a place for Valari to work her quiet magic. People came with questions but left in silence. Valari never spoke. She didn't have to. Her food did all the talking. A grizzled bounty hunter came first. He sat without removing his helmet. Valari served him a bowl of warm stew, flavored with crushed red roots and soft herbs from her homeworld. He took one bite, froze, then slowly removed his helmet. His eyes were wet. "My sister made this," he said, voice shaking. "She died when the colony fell." He left his payment in silence, a silver coin engraved with her planet's lost symbol. Next came a traitor, greedy and proud. He sniffed at the food, insulted it, laughed at the small portions. But when he tasted the sweet rice and honeystone glaze, he sat down and whispered, "How did you know my grandmother used to make this?" He offered triple the price, but Valari refused. She accepted only a single copper ring and a nod of thanks. The market started whispering, not about prices or stolen goods, but about her, the quiet alien woman who made food that opened hearts. People began calling her the Silent Flame. They said she could read your soul through your footsteps, that her meals showed you the memories you buried. Some said she was a priestess, others thought she was a witch. Jack smiled at the rumors, but he knew the truth. She was a survivor, and now she was becoming something more, a symbol. Soon others came not for food, but for healing. A widow who had lost her children, a soldier broken by guilt, a young thief who cried into his soup. Valari fed them all, no questions, no judgments. Only warm hands, full bowls, and the soft clink of spoons. Revo warned Jack, "This is beautiful but dangerous. The more famous she gets, the more noise we make." Jack nodded. He knew the hunters were still out there, but he also saw something in Valari, strength growing behind her silence. One night a child came to the stall. She was small, her face dirty, her clothes torn. Valari served her gently, adding a small piece of sweetbread on the side. The girl ate quickly, then looked up and whispered, "Thank you." Valari knelt down and touched the girl's forehead, then took off her own scarf and wrapped it around the child's shoulders. Word of that act spread faster than fire. The next morning, flowers were placed on Valari's table, alien blooms from 3 different planets, all from strangers who had heard the whispers. The Silent Flame stall became more than a place to eat. It became a message, a rebellion, not with violence, but with kindness, a quiet resistance that grew stronger with every bite. And then one evening the crowd parted. A figure stepped forward, tall, armored, and cloaked. Jack stood alert, hand near his old blaster, but Valari didn't flinch. She walked to the edge of her stall and stared up at the figure. The helmet came off. It was a woman with golden skin and eyes like mirrors. She was a high officer of one of the trade alliances, powerful and feared. "I heard the stories," the woman said. "I didn't believe them." Valari simply handed her a small bowl of broth. The officer drank slowly, then sat down, eyes lowered. This was my mother's farewell dish," she whispered. "She made it before leaving our home forever." She looked at Valari, trembling. "How do you know these things?" Valari smiled gently, then reached into her satchel and handed the officer a folded piece of paper. It was a new recipe, written in symbols, not words. A gift. The officer rose and said nothing. She turned and left without looking back. But everyone knew. Something had changed. From that moment on, Valari was no longer just a cook. She was a legend. The hunters would come again, yes. But now, she had a shield stronger than any weapon. The love of a people who had tasted hope. It began with a single table. Now Valari's food stall had grown into something more. A quiet kitchen under the market's old ceiling, warm lights hanging from rusted beams. Her station wasn't fancy, still made from scrap and spare parts. But the people called it a sanctuary. The scent of her cooking floated through the air like music, and every day the line stretched longer. Some brought food to trade, others brought stories. But most came just to feel something again. to remember, to heal. Jack sat near the corner, working on a broken drone with one hand and holding tea with the other. His eyes stayed on Valari, always watching, always ready, not because she was weak, but because he couldn't imagine his world without her now. She had changed him. Her silence had said more than any speech. Her food had taught him how to feel again. No one knew exactly when the table in the center appeared, a large wooden one with mismatched chairs of every size. It wasn't for paying customers. It was for the hungry, the lost, the ones with no home. Valari called it the open table, or at least that's what Jack called it for her. Every night strangers gathered there. They didn't speak much, some cried, some just ate, but they never left without leaving something behind. Hope, coins, drawings, even poems written on napkins. Then came the day when the hunters returned. It was late afternoon when the market lights flickered and dimmed. The crowd fell silent as the black ship lowered itself near the rooftops. This time, the hunters did not wear masks. They walked boldly, 5 of them, heavy boots echoing across the steel floor. Their leader was taller than the rest, with a long coat and silver insignia on his chest. Valari stood quietly behind her stove, not moving, not flinching. Jack stepped in front of her, his old blaster hidden under his coat. But before he could say anything, the crowd began to move. One by one, people stepped between the hunters and the stall. A miner, a widow, a child with sauce on his face, a trader, a mechanic, a smuggler with burn scars on his hands. They didn't shout, they didn't fight. They just stood, shoulder to shoulder. The hunter leader looked at them, expression unreadable. "This is not your concern," he said. "She is property." Jack's voice was steady. "She's family." The hunter stepped forward, but the crowd didn't move. A hand rested on his chest. It was the officer from before, the one who had tasted her mother's farewell dish. She had returned, not in uniform, but in a plain cloak. She whispered something in the hunter's ear, and he stopped. Then slowly, unbelievably, he turned around. The others followed. No words, no fight, only quiet retreat. As the ship lifted, off the market erupted, not in cheers but in soft applause, not loud, not wild, just the kind of quiet that says, "We see you. We stand with you." That night, Valari cooked a new dish, one she had never made before, a blend of spices from every culture she had fed, a little sweetness, a little fire, and a lot of warmth. She served it at the open table. Jack sat beside her, holding a ladle instead of a blaster. He poured drinks for the guests, laughing softly when one of the chairs broke and someone had to sit on a crate instead. Valari looked around the room, her eyes shining in the golden light. This, she thought, was what freedom tasted like. Not just survival, but peace. Not just silence, but being heard, even without a voice. One of the guests, a quiet girl with large ears and wide eyes, asked Jack, "What's her story?" Jack smiled and looked at Valari. "She doesn't speak much," he said, "but she told me once. Every meal she makes is a piece of her past, and now, every person who eats it becomes part of her future." The girl nodded, taking another. "Pitko, I hope she never stops." Valari didn't say anything. She simply placed another bowl in front of a tired traveler who had just walked in. Then she glanced at the empty chair at the end of the table. It didn't stay empty for long. A young boy climbed up and sat there. Wide-eyed, hungry, Valari handed him a warm plate, and just like that the table was full again, forever full, forever home. Because in this small kitchen, in this quiet corner of a loud galaxy, no one ate alone again.